there was a writer, so this is the patient's writer that was blocked with wax. You can see the patient's got loads of hairs at the entrance of the ears. And the reason why I showed you the patient's left ear as well, the one without any wax, because that had an equal amount of hairs. There's been quite a few questions about hairs in the ears and why don't I trim them. I think one person's been quite aggressive in the last couple of videos demanding an answer. Well, the reason why we don't always remove hairs from the ears is because there's no clinical need to. As I've just demonstrated, this patient's left ear had just as equal amount of cilia, hairs, actually more located on the tragus and the concha bowl, and just at the entrance of the ear, and they still didn't have any earwax. So there's this, sometimes yes, if you've got massive amount of wax and a certain, hairs in the ear, it can mat against the wax and prevent it from migrating, but not always. And I'm not a barber, so I'm not here to trim hairs from the ears. Then we've got to think about infection control. You've got all these hairs flying around in the room before I come for the next client. The clippers, the shavers, how do we sterilise that? So when surgeons perform surgery in an operating theatre, all this equipment's sterilised. They have an autoclave machine. We don't, and they have to trim the hairs to open up the flesh where they're going to make the incision. So it prevents it, so they can make a smooth incision. It's not going to get infected by any hairs. And me removing these hairs are not going to stop the wax from coming back. As a viewer, you may not like that, but I'm performing the procedure not for the viewer. I'm performing the procedure for the patient, and the patient doesn't need the hairs extracted, pulled out or shaved. And there is a few hairs that I will pluck out as part of the procedure, and you'll see that with the forceps a bit later on. But I'm not going to get a razor or clippers and start shaving the hairs. For that one individual who's got quite angry about it, you don't have to watch the channel. I'm not forcing you to watch. I think they've made a couple of comments. I've refrained from commenting back in notes, but as I said, I'm not performing the procedures for the viewers. I'm performing it for the patient who attends, and I think I've given quite a few examples of reasons why I don't want to trim these hairs. The advice I have given to the patient is that if they do trim the hairs themselves, just place some cotton wool at the entrance of the ear. So if they do trim the hairs, and that's their prerogative, that these hairs don't fly into the ear, because then they can get loose and matted. But I've got a few hairs in my ears, it's not causing any problems. Anyway, so we tried to use suction initially, and it's quite a narrow ear canal. The consistency of wax is not very susceptible to suction, so I'm using a hook and Jobson horn. Eventually I do remove this with an ear hook, and it's a solid piece. So again, just going back into the ear hook, trying to get in behind. I'm just rolling it forwards. Now, the reason why this patient's getting a wax build in this ear and not their left ear, which is equally as hairy, is because of the anatomy of the ear. This ear is a lot narrower and bendy and twisty near the entrance. This wax, as it's trying to migrate naturally, whereas it can in the left ear, in this right ear, it can't, because you can see just how narrow it is. Now, this is where, as I'm removing some wax out of the ear, there's some hairs that are matted to it, which are plucked out. So I think there's been a couple of videos I uploaded recently where the ear was so hairy, where I had to pluck the hairs out in order to visualize the ear. So there was a clinical need. Here there's not, because I can still, as you'll see in a moment, I do manage to remove this wax plug, and I've got a clear view of it, as you can see. So I'm just going to glide the hook in behind again. So I created an opening at the top, swiveling the hook behind, bringing it forwards, and it was a tug of war. So it's almost popped out there. So it's almost half hanging out of the ear now. So I thought, let me try the forceps again now. See if I can get a grip and pull this out. So I'm going to glide it at the top again, the hook. I think on this occasion I do manage to get it out. So I'm able to get the hook a bit further in the ear, right behind the wax plug, so I've got full force, full throttle behind it. And it's important when you use the hook to extract a piece of wax that the tip of the hook, you don't graze the base of the ear canal and accidentally cut it. There was that log of wax, and you can see inside the inner 2/3 of the ear, there's no hairs there whatsoever. You trim these hairs, they're just going to grow back a lot quicker than the wax will be able to migrate. So, as I said, there's no clinical need here. It's just the narrowness of the ear. The inside of the ear, there's no hair follicles there whatsoever. For those who genuinely ask the question, by all means, that is no problem. For those who are being quite critical and rude and angry about it, well, as I've mentioned before, no one's forcing you to watch my channel.